At first, there is discomfort. The silence seems to press in from all sides. The absence of stimulation feels like a void. You reach for your phone. You want to text someone. You think of food, sex, entertainment, anything to fill that space. But if you wait just a little longer, a shift occurs. You begin to hear thoughts you didn't know you had. You become aware of how restless your body is, how impatient your mind has become. And then, slowly, your awareness sharpens. You notice the rhythm of your breath, the tightness in your chest, the longing in your heart that has nothing to do with pleasure and everything to do with presence. Energy conserved is awareness amplified. This is one of the great misunderstandings of modern life. People believe the more they consume, the more alive they will feel. But it is the opposite. The more energy we expend chasing external stimulation, the less we have to direct inward. Every moment spent indulging is a moment we are not listening. And what we fail to hear is our own soul whispering. Come back. Abstinence, whether practiced physically, emotionally, or energetically, is not a denial of life. It is a return to it. Neuroscience supports this. When we abstain from overstimulation, particularly in the form of high reward behaviors like sex or excessive screen use, the brain's dopamine pathways begin to recalibrate. In simple terms, your brain stops chasing the spike and starts appreciating the subtle. Think of it this way: imagine a person who eats cake every day. Soon, even the richest dessert no longer satisfies. Now consider a person who has not tasted sugar in a month. A ripe peach becomes divine. The same is true for life. When we constantly indulge, we become numb. But when we conserve, we awaken. There is a story of an old martial artist who was known for his serenity and depth. A young student once asked him, "Master, why do you live such a simple life? Don't you want more pleasure?" The master replied, "Pleasure is a wave. If you ride it too often, the sea becomes stormy. But when the waters are still, even a ripple becomes profound." In today's world, most people live in storms of their own making. They crave deep connection, but can't sit alone in a room. They long for love, but are addicted to validation. The body is flooded with sensory input, but the soul is starved, and yet the way out is not complicated. It is the courage to stop, to pause, to conserve. From a physiological perspective, abstinence leads to increased prefrontal cortex activity, the part of the brain responsible for insight, planning, and self-regulation. It also quiets the amygdala, reducing impulsivity and fear-based reactions. That means greater clarity, emotional control, and focus. But beyond the science lies something even more powerful: the capacity to truly connect. When you withhold your energy from constant output, when you stop giving your body everything it demands, you begin to see others differently. You are not drawn to the loudest person in the room. You start noticing subtleties, a glance, a breath, the unspoken truth behind someone's words. This is how awareness expands. This is how intimacy deepens, not through more physical touch, but through more emotional presence. Relationships thrive when awareness is high. Think about it. How many times have arguments arisen not from malice, but from misattunement? Two people reacting from fatigue, distraction, or inner chaos. But when one person is centered, when their energy is not scattered, they listen, they see, and they hold space instead of escalating. Abstinence creates this space. It is not about repression. Repression creates tension. But conscious restraint, this is a form of wisdom. It means you are no longer enslaved by the body's impulses. You choose, you respond, and in that space between stimulus and response, freedom lives. One man once said, after 60 days of abstinence from sexual activity and digital media, "I feel like I'm walking through life awake for the first time. I can feel the emotions of people around me. I notice my own reactions before they explode." And I finally feel like I'm not chasing anything. I'm here. This awareness is a superpower in relationships when your mind is not clouded by dopamine highs and withdrawal crashes. You begin to see others as they are, not as extensions of your unmet desires, but as beings with their own stories, wounds, and needs. You become less reactive and more compassionate. You speak less and listen more. And ironically, when you stop trying to get something from others, you begin to receive. This brings us to the second principle. Abstinence builds the muscle of discipline. Discipline is not something you are born with. It is a skill trained like any other. And the training ground is everyday life. Every moment you choose not to indulge in an impulse, you grow stronger. Every time you override the itch to escape discomfort, you gain mastery. This is not just poetic, it's biological. Neural pathways of willpower strengthen with use. The brain literally rewires. But this kind of discipline is not harsh. It is not the rigid, punishing version that many associate with strict routines. True discipline is compassionate. It does not suppress, it guides. It does not punish, it protects. Think of a parent who gently says to a child, "Not now, this isn't good for you." That same voice must be cultivated inside yourself. Abstinence teaches you to parent your own desires. Consider this: when a person cannot say no to their desires, who is in control? Not them. The craving is, the addiction is, the pattern is. But when you can feel a craving, observe it, and still choose wisely, then you are free. Discipline, in this sense, is not deprivation. It is sovereignty. There's a story of a woman who had spent years in toxic relationships. She was kind, giving, and deeply emotional. But she was also impulsive. She admitted she couldn't stand being alone, so she would jump into relationships just to avoid loneliness. Over time, these choices led to emotional pain and betrayal. But something changed when she began a personal fast, not from food, but from romantic engagement. No dating, no texting, no flirtation. At first, the silence was excruciating. She cried, she doubted. But then clarity arrived. She began journaling, walking, sitting with her discomfort. And slowly, she realized that most of her relationships had not been love, they had been escapes. For the first time, she saw herself, not as someone waiting to be completed, but as someone learning to be whole. This is what abstinence offers: the space to see what is real, to untangle the root from the weeds. And from that clarity, a different kind of love becomes possible. One that is not desperate, but discerning. In psychology, this process is known as delayed gratification. The marshmallow test, a famous study, showed that children who could wait for a second marshmallow instead of eating the first one immediately ended up with better life outcomes. But this isn't just about future success. It's about the inner architecture of patience, awareness, and choice. When you train this muscle in one area, such as sexual or sensory abstinence, it affects all areas. You become less reactive in arguments, less likely to make impulsive financial decisions, more capable of holding silence when words would cause harm. In relationships, this manifests as emotional maturity. You're no longer the person who storms out when things get tense. You can stay. You can listen. You don't always need to win the argument. You don't need to be right to feel secure. That's discipline in action. And there's a mystery here, too. Something profound begins to happen when you hold your energy instead of releasing it constantly. Whether it's physical, emotional, or creative energy, when you contain it, it builds, it simmers, it concentrates. And then when you speak, when you act, when you create, it has weight, presence, power. People feel it. They may not know why, but they notice you differently. You are not frantic. You are not needy. Your energy is rooted, grounded, and this creates trust, not just from others, but within yourself. You begin to trust your own timing, your own choices. You don't rush decisions out of anxiety. You let things unfold. This kind of inner discipline makes relationships more honest. You stop manipulating to get what you want. You stop performing. You speak your truth, even if it's uncomfortable. And you allow others to do the same, because you are not afraid of the stillness that follows hard conversations. You have met silence. You have made peace with it. And now it serves you. There's an old Eastern phrase, "He who conquers others is strong, but he who conquers himself is mighty." This is not just philosophical. It is practical. When you abstain, when you pull back, slow down, and listen, you become mighty not in domination, but in presence. You can stand in front of someone you love and not flinch when they are upset. You can hear criticism without crumbling. You can sit with desire and not be enslaved by it. And from that strength, you love better. You love wiser, because your love is no longer a transaction. It is an offering, a choice, not a compulsion. To live this way requires one thing above all: patience. Patience with your own process. Patience with your discomfort. And patience with the people around you who are still caught in the storm. Not everyone will understand your silence. Some will interpret your restraint as coldness. But stay the course, because something is forming inside you that they cannot yet see. You are becoming whole. And in that wholeness, you will not need to chase. You will attract, not by charm, but by essence. Not by effort, but by alignment. And that is where the deeper path begins. When a room is crowded with noise and movement, we are rarely aware of its shape. We only notice the objects inside, the distractions, the motion. But when that room is emptied, when the people leave, when the sound fades, suddenly we begin to see the space itself, its corners, its silence, its structure. The same is true of our inner world. As long as we are full of sensation, stimulation, and activity, we are unaware of our deeper self. But in moments of emptiness, the shape of the soul begins to emerge. It is common to confuse emptiness with absence, to believe that when something is missing, pleasure, company, stimulation, life is somehow lacking. But what if the opposite is true? What if the space we avoid is the very ground where clarity begins to grow? Emptiness is not the lack of something valuable. It is the space where value can finally be seen. Not because we put something there, but because we finally cleared everything else away. This can be most clearly observed in moments of solitude. Many people say they dislike being alone, but if we look deeper, it's not the aloneness that troubles them. It's what arises in that silence. The unprocessed emotions, the grief that was never acknowledged, the disappointments long buried under distraction. The mind becomes a mirror, and for many, that reflection is uncomfortable. And so they run into business, into romance, into addiction, into noise. But what they are truly running from is themselves. There's a man I once knew who had been through 3 marriages. Each one ended for different reasons. So it seemed. But beneath the surface, a pattern was forming. After every divorce, he would quickly jump into a new relationship, claiming he had finally found the right one. But with time, the same cracks would appear: emotional distance, dissatisfaction, restlessness. One day, he was asked a simple question: have you ever truly been alone? Not lonely, but alone with yourself. He laughed at first, then he grew quiet. No, he admitted, I don't think I ever have. And so he tried. No dating, no distractions, just him for 90 days. He journaled. He sat in silence. He watched the tides of his own emotions rise and fall. And something unexpected happened. He began to notice how his need for connection had been more about avoiding pain than seeking truth. He realized that in every relationship, he had shown only fragments of himself, pieces designed to please, to avoid conflict, to be loved. But In the absence of another person to shape himself around, he met the person he had never dared to be. This is the gift of emptiness. It is not hollow, it is revealing. In Eastern traditions, there is the concept of wu wei, the wisdom of non-action. Not in the sense of laziness or withdrawal, but of spaciousness. The idea that sometimes by doing less, we allow the deeper intelligence of life to surface. When we step out of the way, clarity arrives. When we stop filling every moment, insight begins to whisper. Psychology echoes this. The subconscious mind, where most of our beliefs, emotional wounds, and motivations live, does not speak in noise. It speaks in symbols, feelings, and quiet realizations. It surfaces only when the conscious mind is still, when you are scrolling endlessly, arguing repeatedly, or constantly performing. The subconscious has no room to speak. But in silence, it begins to release. It says, look at this memory. Notice this pattern. Here is the truth beneath your anger. And often, what emerges in that space is not weakness, but clarity. People begin to understand that their triggers are unhealed wounds, that their control issues come from past abandonment, that their jealousy is really a fear of not being enough. None of this is easy to face, but it is real, and anything real has the power to transform. There's a quote often attributed to Rumi. Try not to resist the changes that come your way. Instead, let life live through you. When we allow emptiness, we are not resisting life. We are making space for it. We are letting it pass through us, clean us, refine us. Not because we are broken, but because we are evolving. In relationships, this capacity for emptiness is essential. Many conflicts arise not from a lack of love, but from an inability to hold space. Two people become overwhelmed. They fill every moment with expectations, conversations, demands, and projections. There is no breathing room, and so resentment grows, not because the relationship is doomed, but because there is no silence in which love can rest. But when one or both people learn to embrace stillness, everything changes. A pause in the conversation becomes an opportunity to listen, not to respond, but to understand. A day apart is no longer a threat, but a sacred time to return to the self. Emotional space becomes safety, not separation. And in that space, authenticity grows. A woman once shared a story about her long-term partner. They loved each other deeply, but over time, tension had built. Every conversation felt like a battle. Everything said seemed to provoke a reaction. And so, they agreed to take a week of silence, not as punishment, but as practice. No arguing, no talking about the relationship, just silence, journaling, and reflection. At first, it felt distant, cold. But then, something softened. She wrote, "In the quiet, I began to remember why I loved him. Not the version of him I wanted to change, but the essence. The man behind the noise. And I realized how much of our struggle came from me trying to fill the space with my fear, instead of simply allowing it to be. The courage to sit in emptiness is rare, but it is the beginning of intimacy, not just with others, but with yourself. From a physiological perspective, the nervous system benefits immensely from this emptiness. When we are constantly stimulated, the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response, is in overdrive. This leads to fatigue, anxiety, poor digestion, shallow breathing, and even chronic illness. But when we pause, when we step back, when we breathe, literally and metaphorically, the parasympathetic nervous system activates. The body begins to repair, the mind begins to regulate, and the heart begins to open. Creativity also flourishes in emptiness. Many people assume that creativity is about doing more thinking, more talking, more working. But ask any artist, writer, or visionary, and they will tell you the best ideas arrive in stillness. It is in the shower, on a walk, during meditation. When the mind is quiet, that brilliance sneaks in. Why? Because space is the mother of insight. It is the womb from which vision is born. One musician described this beautifully. He said, "For years I chased the perfect song. I would lock myself in the studio, pushing myself to write, to produce, to perform. But the songs felt hollow, mechanical. Then, one weekend, I went camping alone. No guitar, no phone. Just the sound of wind and water. And that's when the melody came. It wasn't something I created. It was something I received." Where relationships are the same. When we are full of opinions, stories, and noise, we cannot hear what the other is truly saying. We project, we assume, we defend. But when we listen with space, with emptiness, we hear the meaning beneath the words. We hear the emotion behind the anger, the longing behind the silence. This kind of listening is healing. It says to the other person, "You don't need to shout to be heard. I am here, even in the quiet." And yet, so few of us are trained in this. From a young age, we are taught to fill the space, to talk more, do more, be more. But very rarely are we taught how to be, how to sit, breathe, notice. And so, when life strips something away, a job, a relationship, a habit, we panic. We think we've lost ourselves. But maybe in those moments we are not being broken. We are being revealed. There's an image often used in Zen philosophy. A muddy glass of water. When you stir it, the water becomes cloudy. You can't see the bottom. But if you let it sit, the mud settles. The water clears. And then you can see everything. Emptiness is what allows the sediment of our lives to settle. It is the practice of becoming clear. For some, this emptiness takes the form of a retreat, a weekend away, unplugged and quiet. For others, it's a simple habit, 1 hour each day with no phone, no talk, no to-do list, just presence, just space. And in that space, we meet ourselves not as we think we should be, but as we are. And in that meeting, something sacred begins. The soul, which has been whispering beneath the surface for so long, finally has room to speak. And what it says is not always grand. Often it's simple. It may say, "Rest," or "Let go. You are enough." These messages are subtle, but they are the medicine so many are seeking. Not outside, but within. The difficulty is that the world does not often reward this kind of stillness. We are praised for productivity, not presence. For noise, not nuance. But those who learn to embrace emptiness carry something different. A quiet power, a centered energy, a way of being that says, "I am not trying to impress you. I am trying to be real with you." And that is rare. This kind of presence cannot be faked. It is born only in the silence, in the waiting, in the willingness to be with what is. It is not about being better than others. It is about being more true to yourself, more whole, more honest. And in that honesty, connection deepens, not just with others, but with the mystery of life itself. To live in alignment with this truth is not to withdraw from the world, but to meet it from a different place. You engage not out of need, but from fullness. You speak not to fill the silence, but to express something genuine. You love not to escape loneliness, but to celebrate presence. And it begins with emptiness, not as void, but as space. Not as lack, but as invitation. The soul has always been speaking. The question is, will we make enough space to finally listen? The body speaks in sensations, impulses, and desires. It pulls us toward pleasure, comfort, release. And for much of our lives, we follow that voice without question. We believe that because it feels urgent, it must be true. That because the body longs for something, we must give it what it wants. But in doing so, we often miss the quieter voice underneath, the one not fueled by urgency, but by insight. Emotional clarity is not something we stumble upon. It does not shout, it does not compete, it waits. And it is only when the surface level noise of physical desire quiets down that we begin to hear it. Not just hear, but feel its weight, its depth, it's wisdom. There is a reason why many of life's most regretted decisions happen in moments of high emotional and physical arousal, whether in anger, lust, fear, or craving. When the body is activated, the mind loses access to its highest capacity for insight. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for decision making, empathy, and foresight, literally goes offline during moments of intense desire. In those moments, the mind narrows. We can only see what we want, not what it means, not what it costs. But when we begin to train ourselves to sit with that desire rather than act on it immediately, something begins to shift. The initial wave rises, sometimes strong, even overwhelming, but we breathe, we observe, we do not react. And in that pause, clarity arrives. It's not that desire disappears, but it no longer controls us. It becomes a teacher, not a tyrant. In relationships, this becomes one of the most profound transformations. So many people enter connection driven by unmet physical needs. The need for closeness, touch, sex, affirmation. These are not wrong, they are human. But when those needs are not tempered by awareness, we enter relationship looking for relief, not resonance. We try to use others as medicine for our inner unrest. And in doing so, we don't truly meet them. We consume them. And then wonder why intimacy fades. One man shared his story after a period of celibacy. He had spent years in and out of relationships, always seeking what he described as connection, but always a feeling empty after the initial rush faded. He finally decided to take a break, not just from physical intimacy, but from seeking altogether. For 6 months, he chose silence, reflection, nature, journaling. During this time, he began to notice how often his desire for women had nothing to do with love or even real attraction. It was loneliness disguised as lust. It was a desire to feel worthy, to escape the anxiety of being alone. And once he stopped chasing, that anxiety surfaced fully. But instead of numbing it again, he faced it. And in that process, he said something changed. I stopped seeing women as a way to fill me, and I started seeing them as beings to honor, to learn from, to respect. My heart opened in ways it never had before. Not because I found the one, but because I stopped abandoning myself. When the body is constantly fed, the soul starves. It is not about punishment, it's about rhythm. When we give ourselves space to observe desire without reacting to it, we create a kind of inner transparency. Emotions rise and fall, but now they do so without distortion. We begin to recognize the difference between longing and love, between chemistry and compatibility, between attraction and alignment. In traditional contemplative practices, the discipline of abstaining from physical intimacy is often not about denying pleasure, but cultivating discernment. The ancients knew what modern neuroscience confirms. When you overindulge in dopamine-driven behaviors, your baseline for satisfaction drops. What once brought joy now feels flat. You need more stimulation just to feel the same effect. But when you abstain, even for a short while, your sensitivity resets. A simple touch, a kind word, a moment of eye contact can become deeply fulfilling. This has profound implications for emotional intimacy. Many couples struggle not because they don't love each other, but because they are numb. Their nervous systems are overloaded. Their emotional bandwidth is drained by 1,000 small distractions, compulsions, and unresolved tensions. And so they react, argue, withdraw, not because they mean to, but because they can't feel clearly anymore. The channels of connection are clogged. By stepping back from physical indulgence, even temporarily, we begin to clean those channels. We tune into subtler signals. We notice when our partner's voice trembles, when their breath shortens, when their gaze lingers in sadness. We hear the story behind the silence. We feel the unsaid. This is emotional clarity, and it cannot be found in a rush. It arrives when the noise has settled. A couple once tried a 30-day period of physical abstinence, not out of dysfunction, but as a practice of conscious connection. During that time, they focused on non-physical ways of intimacy, listening, walking together, cooking meals, reading aloud. They found that many old arguments simply stopped arising. Why? Because they were finally present, not using sex to bypass conflict, not using touch to replace communication. At the end of the 30 days, they said their physical connection deepened. Not because it became more frequent, but because it became more meaningful. It felt like making love for the first time again. The woman said, not to each other's bodies, but to each other's presence. This is the alchemy of emotional clarity. It transforms the quality of your relationships. You no longer seek others to soothe your agitation. You connect from calm, from depth, from truth. And because your connection is no longer dependent on gratification, it becomes rooted, reliable, alive. To get there, though, you must learn to witness your desires with tenderness and strength, not to suppress them, not to indulge them blindly, but to meet them like a wise elder meets a passionate child with understanding and guidance. Desire says, now, but wisdom says, not yet. Let's listen first. And in that listening, deeper truths emerge. You may find that what you truly want is not sex, but safety. Not affirmation, but acceptance. Not attention, but intimacy. These needs are rarely satisfied by immediate gratification. They require presence, vulnerability, patience, and most of all, self-awareness. This is why emotional clarity is a gateway to emotional maturity. When you can sit with your urges, observe your patterns, and respond instead of react, you become trustworthy, not just to others, but to yourself. You know you will not abandon your values in a moment of temptation. You know you will not speak from anger and regret it later. You know you can pause, and in that pause, choose love. This changes the entire dynamic of relationships. You stop playing games. You stop chasing validation. You no longer need to seduce or prove. You show up as you are, clean, grounded, clear, and you attract those who do the same. There's a reason the wisest among us often speak slowly, act deliberately, and carry a calm presence. It's not because they don't feel desire or emotion. It's because they have learned not to be ruled by it. They've practiced sitting with their inner fire without letting it burn down the house. This is possible for all of us. It is not reserved for monks or mystics. It begins with one moment, the decision to pause when your body demands action, to breathe when your emotions demand a reaction, to wait, not forever, but long enough to hear the deeper voice beneath the impulse. And that voice always brings truth. A woman once described her practice of mindful abstinence after ending a chaotic relationship. For the first time, she said, she started asking herself before every interaction, what is the feeling underneath this craving? Sometimes it was loneliness. Other times it was anger. Sometimes it was genuine connection. But because she waited, she could tell the difference. It changed everything. She said, I stopped mistaking desire for destiny. When we are governed by unchecked physical desire, we lose the ability to choose wisely. We move fast. We ignore red flags. We stay in situations that do not nourish us because the chemistry is strong. But chemistry without clarity is a fire with no direction. It burns bright, but it doesn't warm the soul. It consumes. Then it collapses. But when clarity guides desire, something else happens. Desire becomes sacred. It is no longer something to escape or be ashamed of. It is energy, powerful energy, creative energy. But now it flows through you with direction, with awareness, with heart. And that is the kind of energy that builds rather than destroys. It creates intimacy, not illusion. It opens the heart rather than feeding the ego. This is not an easy path. It requires daily practice. You may fail, you may fall. But every time you return to awareness, you strengthen the muscle of clarity. And with time, what once felt like an overpowering wave becomes a current you can navigate. Your relationships will reflect this change. You will notice yourself choosing differently, speaking differently, loving differently, not with the desperation of need, but with the steadiness of knowing. You will begin to see yourself not as someone waiting to be chosen, but as someone who is choosing wisely. And in that shift, your connections will no longer be based on compulsion, but on consciousness. They will not demand your peace, but protect it. They will not add to your confusion, but clarify your path, because you have first done that within yourself. There is a difference between being available and being prepared. Many people desire love. They long for connection, intimacy, and companionship. They open themselves up, but what they offer is cluttered. Not externally, but internally. Mental noise, emotional residue, unresolved pain, unexamined motives. And so, even when love arrives, it cannot stay. Not because it is unworthy, but because it cannot breathe in a space that is not clean. True connection requires inner cleanliness. This is not about being perfect or flawless. It is about being honest. Honest about the emotional burdens you carry. Honest about the stories you project onto others. Honest about the parts of yourself that are still healing. And most of all, it is about having enough respect for another human being to offer them a presence that is unpolluted by deception, addiction, or unconscious need. It begins with energy. Every human interaction is an energetic exchange. Some people walk into a room and lighten it. Others carry a heaviness that speaks before they do. Not because they are bad people, but because they haven't yet released what burdens them. And energy doesn't lie. You can smile, perform, say all the right things. But if your inner world is in chaos, others will feel it. Especially the ones who are sensitive enough to love you deeply. When your energy is clean, people trust you without knowing why. They feel safe around you. Not because you're always agreeable, but because you're clear. You are not hiding an agenda. You are not leaking neediness. You are not trying to use others to complete yourself. You are already whole. And that wholeness radiates. It doesn't ask. It offers. But how does one become clean inside? Not by suppressing or pretending, not by escaping or covering it with positivity. Cleanliness is not avoidance. It is purification. And purification requires fire, meaning you must be willing to sit in the heat of your own discomfort. You must look at the stories you tell yourself about love, about abandonment, about worthiness. You must question where those stories came from and whether they are still true. There is a woman who once described her inner work like cleaning out a deep well. For years, she had wondered why her relationships always left her exhausted, why she kept attracting partners who were emotionally unavailable. Finally, she decided to stop dating. Not as a punishment, but as a ritual. She began to reflect on her history, journal her past, revisit memories she had buried. She cried. She raged. She forgave. Slowly, she realized she had been trying to fix in others what she hadn't yet faced in herself. Her need for closeness had often been a form of control, and her love had been laced with fear. She said, "I thought I had a love problem. What I had was a purity problem. My energy was not clean. It was mixed with fear and shame and confusion. Once I began to clear it, everything changed. I stopped attracting chaos. I started to feel calm in my own presence. And when the right person came, I didn't have to fight for peace. They felt it because I already lived it." Inner cleanliness is not static. It is a daily practice. Every time you choose not to speak from anger, not to chase approval, not to hide behind performance, you are purifying. Every time you sit with your own discomfort, instead of asking someone else to carry it, you are cleansing. Every time you tell the truth about who you are, what you feel, and what you need, without manipulation or defense, you are washing your soul. In relationships, this becomes a sacred offering. When two people are committed to staying clean, not only for themselves but for each other, the connection deepens in a way that physical chemistry cannot match. It becomes devotional, present, alive. There is less reactivity, less confusion, more transparency, more rest. This is especially important when we speak about sexual energy. Physical intimacy is not just a biological act. It is an energetic transaction. When you join bodies, you merge fields. If either person is holding fear, anger, or unresolved trauma, that energy does not disappear in the moment of pleasure. It transfers. And this is why, after some encounters, people feel drained, scattered, or emotionally heavy. They didn't just share skin. They shared wounds. One man described how he used to treat sex like an escape. It was his way of avoiding loneliness, stress, even boredom. But after years of doing this, he noticed that he began to feel numb, not just to others, but to himself. He said, "I realized I wasn't really making love to anyone. I was just using their body to run from my own pain." When he began a period of conscious abstinence, things began to change. He felt more emotional. At first, it scared him. Then he realized these were the emotions he had been avoiding through pleasure. He began to cry for no reason. He began to remember things he thought he had forgotten. He began to dream vividly. And as he stayed with this process, he began to feel lighter, more clear, more connected. This is the energetic principle of transformation. When you stop discharging your energy through compulsive outlets, that energy rises. It moves into the heart, into the voice, into the eyes. People notice. Not because you say anything different, but because your presence becomes radiant. There is a sacred concept in Eastern philosophy known as the refinement of essence. It means turning raw energy, desire, impulse, instinct into something luminous, not by destroying it, not by rejecting it, but by elevating it, transforming it. And this is what happens when you prioritize inner cleanliness. You no longer use your energy recklessly. You protect it, not out of fear, but out of love. You understand that not everyone is meant to touch your soul. Not everyone is ready to share space with your light. You do not judge them, but you become selective, not as a form of control, but as a form of reverence for yourself and for the relationships you wish to build. This changes how you communicate. When your inner space is clean, your words carry weight. You no longer speak just to fill silence. You speak to reveal truth. You no longer argue to win. You speak to understand. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. Your clarity is enough. Your calm becomes more powerful than their chaos. People often think that strength comes from control, controlling your partner, the outcome, the future. But real strength is the ability to remain rooted in love even when storms pass through. When your inner space is clean, you are not easily swayed. You don't personalize everything. You don't absorb what isn't yours. And you know when to walk away, not from a place of bitterness, but from a place of peace. There is a beautiful story of a man who worked as a spiritual guide. Many came to him seeking advice about love. One woman in particular said she couldn't understand why all her relationships turned toxic. She kept trying to fix them, to compromise, to love harder, but the results were the same. The man asked her, "What do you carry into your relationships that has not been washed?" She paused. She thought about her past, her traumas, her fears, her unresolved anger at her parents. She had never looked at those things as part of the problem, but they were there in every conversation, every reaction, every silence. He said to her, "Love does not fix what we refuse to face. It simply reveals it." And that is what many don't realize. Relationships are not just about joy. They are mirrors. Whatever is unclean in you will eventually surface, not because love failed, but because love illuminates. It brings the hidden into light, and that is the gift if you are willing to see it. Inner cleanliness is the foundation for that kind of seeing. Without it, you blame, you project, you run from every mirror that shows you what you haven't healed. But with it, you begin to thank your relationships. Not just for the pleasure, but for the pressure. Not just for the harmony, but for the disruption. Because now, every conflict becomes a doorway. Every trigger becomes a teacher. You begin to recognize that love is not about getting your way. It is about getting out of your way, so that something real can enter. And to make room for that realness, you must clear out what is false, the ideas of who you should be, the armor you wear to protect your ego, the masks you use to feel safe. When all of that is washed away, what remains is something rare: your essence, your presence, your clean heart. And from that heart, you love differently. You no longer look for someone to rescue you. You don't demand constant reassurance. You become the reassurance. You become the sanctuary. And from that place, your relationships are no longer built on performance, but on presence. Not on fear of loss, but on freedom to stay. You learn to love without clinging, to give without losing, to receive without guilt. And this is only possible when your inner space is not polluted with unexamined pain. To live this way takes courage, because the cleaning process is not glamorous, it's uncomfortable. You may see things in yourself you don't like. You may have to apologize. You may have to sit in solitude longer than you want. But the reward is freedom. Not the freedom to avoid relationship, but the freedom to enter it without contamination. When two people commit to that level of integrity, the relationship becomes a sacred vessel. It is no longer about possession. It is about partnership. It is not about escaping loneliness. It is about expanding presence. It is not about completing each other. It is about creating something clean enough for the soul to live in. And that kind of love is not found. It is built from the inside out. There are times in life when stepping back is not an act of denial, but of direction. Not every absence is rejection. Not every silence is avoidance. And not every pause is a retreat. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do in the face of temptation, distraction, or emotional intensity is to stop, not out of fear, but out of purpose. Abstinence, in its truest form, is not a refusal of experience. It is the honoring of timing, of readiness, of meaning. It is a conscious decision to align one's actions with one's deeper values, rather than being swayed by surface-level cravings. When seen this way, abstinence is not self-denial, it is self-possession. This inner alignment brings a powerful shift in how we approach relationships. Many people pursue connection not from fullness, but from fragmentation. They crave attention because they feel unseen. They crave touch because they feel numb. They crave conversation because they fear their own thoughts. But when a person chooses abstinence, not just sexual, but emotional and energetic, it is not because they are closed. It is because they are clearing space. They are allowing their internal compass to recalibrate. They are asking a deeper question. Am I acting from truth or from habit? In that pause, purpose begins to speak. There is a story of a young man who had recently exited a turbulent relationship. It was passionate but unstable, intense but unsustainable. He found himself repeating the same pattern, jumping from one connection to another, always seeking the rush of newness. But each time after the spark faded, he was left emptier than before. One night, after a particularly painful breakup, he sat alone and wrote in his journal, "What would happen if I didn't rush back into love? What if I allowed this space to speak to me? Rather than fill it, he chose abstinence, not as punishment, but as practice. He stopped dating. He stopped pursuing. He didn't cut himself off from life, but he became deliberate. He focused on his craft. He deepened his friendships. He explored the beliefs that had shaped his idea of love, and what he found surprised him. His longing wasn't just for affection, it was for purpose, for clarity, for someone to share a path with, not just a bed. And in that space, he began to change. He started showing up in the world not from desperation, but from direction. He said no to what didn't feel aligned, not because it wasn't pleasurable, but because it didn't resonate with where he was going. This is the essence of abstinence as alignment. It is not about avoiding love. It's about no longer chasing substitutes for it. In relationships, this becomes a powerful guiding force. When you are aligned with purpose, you do not enter connection to fix or to fill. You enter to share, to learn, to grow. You are not looking to be completed, but to be mirrored. And that shift changes everything. It transforms your standards, not from superiority, but from sincerity. You no longer entertain dynamics that drain your energy or distort your peace. You don't need to prove your worth. You know it, and because of that, you can walk away from what is beautiful but misaligned. One woman, after 3 years of celibacy, was asked why she chose to wait. Her answer was simple. I stopped giving parts of myself to people who weren't walking in the same direction. My body is not a reward. My time is not a game. My love is not a tool. I want something purposeful, not just passionate. Her abstinence was not rejection of love. It was an invitation for a deeper one. And that depth is only possible when we are willing to pause, to reevaluate, to ask ourselves, does this align with who I am becoming? Without that pause, we are led by impulse. We mistake familiarity for fate. We confuse attraction with alignment. And so we return again and again to relationships that mirror our past rather than support our future. But when we act from purpose, we start to choose differently. Not only people, but habits, environments, thoughts. We begin to protect our peace, not out of fear, but out of recognition that our peace is sacred. And anyone who wishes to be close must be willing to respect that. This is where abstinence becomes powerful. It is not simply about saying no to others. It is about saying yes to yourself, your healing, your calling, your truth. It is a declaration that your time is valuable, your energy is meaningful, and your life is moving with intention. And from this foundation, love becomes something else entirely. It is no longer chaotic. It is coherent. It is not built on chemistry alone, but on compatibility, character, and shared vision. It is rooted in mutual growth, not mutual distraction. You begin to ask different questions. Instead of, do they make me feel good? You ask, do we grow well together? Instead of, are we attracted to each other? You ask, are we aligned in what we value, create, and serve? These are not questions of fear. They are questions of clarity, and they only arise when the noise of need has quieted. This clarity allows for a kind of discernment that is rare. Many fall in love with what feels familiar. Few choose love that feels unfamiliar but right, because real alignment doesn't always give you the high. Sometimes it gives you peace. Sometimes it gives you boredom. Not because the relationship lacks energy, but because your nervous system is finally calm. And many mistake that calm for lack of connection, when in fact it is the sign that you are no longer addicted to adrenaline. A man once described his shift after years of casual relationships. He said, he finally met someone who didn't give him butterflies. She gave him silence, stability, presence, and at first he didn't know what to do with that. It felt unfamiliar. But with time, he realized this was the relationship his nervous system had been praying for. Not the chaos of past patterns, but the consistency of real partnership. He said, I wouldn't have seen her before. I would have passed her by looking for the spark. But now, after taking time alone, I could see clearly. I wasn't looking for the high anymore. I was looking for the home. Abstinence allows for that vision to develop. It clears the lens. It slows the spin. It lets you hear the still, small voice that says, "This is right," or "This is not for you," without needing drama to decide. And from that clarity, boundaries are born, not walls, but filters. You no longer let everyone in, not because you are guarded, but because you are guided. You've tasted your own company. You've sat in your own silence. You are not afraid of being alone. And that makes you powerful. You begin to understand that love is not just about emotion. It is about mission. When two people are aligned in purpose, their relationship becomes a vessel. It moves with intention. It serves something greater than itself. And this cannot happen if both are still chasing comfort over growth, pleasure over presence, excitement over evolution. Abstinence teaches patience. It teaches self-trust. It teaches you to wait for what is real, even when what is easy is available. And that waiting shapes you. It deepens your presence. It refines your voice. It strengthens your values. When you finally do enter into relationship again, you are no longer guessing who you are. You've already met yourself. And because of that, you can meet another. Not from illusion, but from integration. This kind of love does not come quickly. It comes slowly, quietly, steadily. It does not demand. It invites. It does not perform. It reveals. It does not consume. It co-creates. And that co-creation is only possible when both people have chosen to walk the path of clarity, when they've aligned their energy, not around chemistry, but around consciousness. And consciousness requires space. It requires silence. It requires saying no to what does not serve, even when it calls loudly. In that no, a deeper yes is born. A yes to love that lasts. A yes to connection that heals. A yes to union that reflects purpose, not just passion. And that yes begins with a quiet decision to wait. Not because you're afraid, but because you're aligned. When the body grows still and the noise of desire fades, what remains is the voice of the soul, clear, calm, and deeply knowing. Abstinence, in its truest form, is not a denial of life, but a deep alignment with it. It is the choice to pause so we may listen, to cleanse so we may connect, and to walk with purpose rather than impulse. Through this journey inward, we cultivate self-mastery, emotional clarity, and the ability to love without losing ourselves. From this inner stillness, true connection begins, not as a need, but as a conscious offering.